What's up, everybody? Welcome to the stream. Today we are tackling the best sample instruments in 2020. I've been wanting to do this stream for a while, but I knew it took a lot of preparation to make it happen. So I'm excited that finally going to dive into this topic. This is by far the most asked question from young composers, and really just all composers, is, what's the latest gear? What's trending right now? What's the best quality we can get for our budget? So that's the topic we're gonna be tackling today. It's gonna be a little bit of a longer stream because we got a lot to get through, but I hope that by the end of this stream, you know exactly what is the best budget gear out there. And what's really neat about this process today is we're gonna be going through really just based on quality alone. We're not really worried about price, because some of these samples we're talking about today, some of these libraries are over $1,000 and some of them are free. So I'm going to be just talking about why it is useful for your tool belt and why you should consider adding it, and how that might help you. And throughout this process today, at the time of this recording on April 29th, 2020, there are a lot of discounts available right now. And there are even some sales going on right now that perhaps in 2 or 3 weeks will not be. So please take advantage of what is available for you today. So I don't want to waste any time. I want to dive right into it. And if you'd like to, you can follow along today with the blog article that I've written on my website. And that is at stephenmalin.com/bestvsts. That's spelled BESTVST. And there is a link in the description below if you want to click on that and just follow along. And I'm going to be following along on the video today, just so we can kind of stay on track and make good time. And as we're jumping through this process, once this video re-uploads to YouTube, all of the timestamps will be in the description as well, so that you can quickly jump to the section that serves you the best. And even if you want to open up the blog article and follow along, if you scroll down to right here, I have all of the sections coded. So where, for example, if you want to click on Woodwinds, boom, it'll jump just to Woodwinds. So I hope that serves you well. So the whole goal behind this is to show you a live demo of what every single one of these sounds like, because it's difficult when there's thousands of libraries out there. It's hard to know what to pick and what is actually cost friendly and what are you actually getting for your money. So I've been in the industry for a long time, and I've used a lot of stuff, and as you guys know, here on my YouTube channel, I do plugin reviews, and so a lot of these products are some that I've had affiliate commission deals with the companies, and some of them I've just gone out and bought because I thought they were so useful. So regardless of where your situation is, this really should be useful to everybody here today, because it's really going to hit the full gamut of paid all the way to free. So let's jump in, and the first category here today, I'm calling them all-in-ones, because most composers, when they start off, they don't have anything. And perhaps like many, you're in a situation where you are just starting to write music and you don't have anything to work with. You may have just purchased your first DAW, and maybe you have something like Logic Pro, which already has a ton of default instruments baked in. That's a great place to start because you already can at least write music. But perhaps you don't have something like Logic Pro or even Digital Performer, a DAW that has a lot in it. Perhaps you're using something like Reaper, which is a low-cost DAW that doesn't have pretty much anything in it at all. So you have to have something to start with, some kind of sound set, so that you can use your orchestra. And so what I call all-in-ones are more or less, it's a big package that will get you a pretty well-rounded set. And really we're going to be looking at two today. We're looking at Native Instruments Komplete 12 Ultimate, which is $1,199. That's pretty up there. And we compare that to Red Room Audio's palette, the Symphonic Sketchpad, which is only $299. Now these are quite different because Komplete really contains a lot of synths, and you can read the description if you'd like, but some of the top plugins within here are Contact, and I have to show Contact. So Contact is the engine by which most sample instruments code. They program their instruments inside. And if you own full version Contact, you can actually create your own samples from scratch. If you record your own WAV files, your own MP3 files, you can throw them in and you can create your own sample instrument, which I do a lot. I do that a lot in my work, and it's super useful. As long as you have a microphone or use your smartphone, whatever, you can record audio files, throw them in, and create your own across a keyboard. So the Kontakt Factory library does come with Kontakt, and what's so neat about this is it has a pretty strong arsenal here of band, choir, orchestral, synth, urban beats, vintage, and world instruments. None of them are great, but they are passable, and they can at least let you write some music. So I just put up a random one here. This is a string ensemble. So for example, if I were to just play some pizzicato, doesn't sound super realistic, but might be really passable for, you know, an entry-level game or something of that nature. So Kontakt we're going to be using a lot here today, and most of the instruments I'm talking about today are Kontakt because they're very small files. You can load them very quickly, and it's going to be a very easy experience. And you'll notice if I just scroll through some of my libraries, I have a lot here, and these are just Kontakt libraries, and these are like the commercial ones. And if I right-click and go to my quick load, these are actually all of my libraries that are hosted within Kontakt. You can see all of my subfolders within subfolders within subfolders. So I've spent years building out this arsenal. Some of them are my own custom instruments. And Kontakt is just an amazing way to organize that. So I think Kontakt is an absolute must-have. I don't think Komplete is a must-have, but I do think Kontakt is. But for the price difference, you might as well go ahead and get Komplete because you're going to get so many other things, such as these really cool synth engines, such as Massive X, which I'm a big fan of. I haven't made up my mind whether Massive or Massive X is my favorite, but you can just kind of check it out. It's like a spaceship. There's a ton of default synths in there, and you can morph these to however the heck you want. I use Massive probably more than any other synth engine out there. So it comes within Komplete, so I think it's fantastic. Absynth is another one that comes with Komplete. Absynth is much more about mutating sounds. So you can take any sound in here and start playing. And then I can hit this beautiful button called Mutate, and it creates a brand new patch randomizing effects. I'm gonna try it again. Let's do a retry. It's a different version. Now it's like a piano. What the heck? So there you go. It's a great sound design tool. FM8 is another one, another synth engine by Komplete as part of the Komplete package. And inside here is same kind of interface where you're going to find just about any type of sound, but these are all FM synthesis. So this is important if you want to sound like Sega Genesis or like 80s music. Really good stuff. So that kind of sums up the Komplete bundle, and there's a bunch of other stuff in there. Later in the chat, we're going to talk about Damage, which is a really interesting industrial percussion library, which I think is a must-have for composers, and that is already inside Komplete. So it's an amazing deal. And then in more recent years, they've added things like a ton of different pianos, including the Unicorda and Alicia's keys, which used to be pretty expensive on their own. It has Symphony Essentials, which is another huge one because it gives you some much higher level strings. I think they even have action strings in there now. Evolve is a ton of cinematic sounds. Jason Graves, composer of Dead Space, Tomb Raider, and a bunch of other games, he uses Evolve a lot in his music. So if you like that more horror ambience type sound, there's a lot of that good stuff in there as well. But of course, that's a high price point. So I know that's not for everybody. But I do think that if you want something that's very well-rounded, that's going to last you a few years before you start adding on more niche categories, it's going to be a great place to start. So moving on to the other option here today, this is for Red Room Audio Palette Symphonic Sketchpad. Now, the Sketchpad is interesting because it features 20 different patches. And you can, if I pull it open here, you can see it for yourself. Now, it's 20 different patches, and I do have a full review video if you want to check that out from the article. And inside here, it just has all the basics that you need. It has all the basic articulations for strings, woodwinds, brass, percussion, so the full orchestra, but it also has things like timpani and all the little orchestral percussion. It has a ton of trailer interesting trailer stuff in here. Has all your board instruments like marimba, xylophone. Even has a really solid piano, an orchestral piano. Has a really nice harp. Has full choir, and then also has a separate patches for trailer tools and a full synth engine. So for this price, it's really unbeatable because of how it combines sections together. And this is not fake. These are not like keyboard recordings. These are actual samplings of a live orchestra. So it's very solid stuff. So let me play through a couple patches here. So this is a multi that I created within Kontakt. So I just combined strings, brass, and woodwinds with piano and choir. So you can build your own multis all day long, but here's what it sounds like if you just put all these things together on a sustain patch. And because it's a multi, I can control everything with my mod wheel. Pretty darn powerful. And of course, each of these instruments by themselves is quite powerful as well. And another cool aspect of Palette is you can build on top of it. So that's the Symphonic Sketchpad side of things, but you can also add on melodic instruments as a separate pack, orchestral effects for all the crazy aleatoric stuff, and then runs and arpeggios. Those are all separate on top of that, but I think it's a really great starter. And even within Palette, we also have this trailer tools patch I want to show you, because this alone, you should be able to, like, this should suffice for all epic music anyway, because you have this full list of things such as Brahms, just a full roster of those, downers, big booms, and all that kind of stuff. So all this electronic goodness, which I think is absolutely awesome. It's unexpected for an orchestral library, but there it is. And there's also a full synth engine, which really reminds me of Massive. I have a full roster of effects you can add, and we're basically just like Massive. We're mixing any two types of wave files. So what I mean by that is a saw wave, a square wave, triangle wave, sine wave. We're just mixing them together with different parameters to create our own synths. So it's a very powerful engine. And I love such a low cost for that. And a quick little shout out. I am a partner with Red Room Audio. And so if you want to support my channel at no additional cost to you and get an amazing discount, 20% off right there, use the code RRAMalin20, 20% off. Use that today. Moving on. One more I wanted to add for the all-in-ones is the company Sonokinetic. Now, I've done a ton of reviews of their instruments, and I'm a big fan of what they're doing. And in fact, right now, this is important to note that Sonokinetic is actually doing, for the first time ever in years of being in business, first time ever partnering with another company. They're partnering with Native Instruments. For those of you familiar with Native Instruments, they're the creators of Komplete, and they're always bringing on big players and doing huge sales for a small window. So at the time of this recording, April 29th, 2020, I believe for the next week, they are doing a massive 70% off sale. I've never seen that ever for Sonokinetic products. All these things I'm about to talk about, which include Indie, Espressivo, Grosso, Noir, and a ton of others. So it's the same link, so all of them, but if you want to use that link right there in the description or right here on the article page, check that out. I think it's super cool. I'll just pull it open really quick for those who are in time to see this. It's pretty stellar. I mean, this stuff is not cheap, and they have a ton of great instruments there. So please take advantage of that. I think that'll serve you really well. But a couple that I want to highlight are Indie and Espressivo, because Sonokinetic is all about sample-based phrases. So this is totally different than a lot of other companies that focus on, for example, a string ensemble, like we just played, is where you might play on your keyboard a chord, and then obviously it plays that chord back, because each of the string sections or the full ensemble was recorded with one note with a conductor, and then they put that into Kontakt, and they did a bunch of round robin samples, and then they package it up and give it to you, right? they produce it. What Sonokinetic does, which is totally different, is they record a chord. They record a chord, so a C major chord by the entire ensemble, and then a C minor chord from the entire ensemble. They'll do it in every inversion. They'll do it at every tempo. They'll do it in every dynamic. It's an insane amount of work, but that's why they're the only company doing it, and they have this incredible reputation for phrase-based libraries. So what they do is they take these recordings, they throw them into Kontakt, but then they do all this crazy programming on the back end that when we as composers open it up, I'm gonna check this out. Words can't really explain it. When I open this thing up, when I play on my keyboard a chord, let's say C major, and then I trigger one of the hundreds of samples that have been recorded, like this. What happens if I change my hand to a E minor shape? How about an E flat major? What it does is it instantly switches and morphs between all those recordings, and it does it in real time. And more importantly than that, it does it at the tempo of my session, and it does it at the beat within the measure. What? It's just insane programming, so that when you have all these things combined together, these libraries are just ridiculously realistic because it's a real type situation, because a real orchestra played it and it's a real phrase. So you can go through any of these libraries and choose any of the shapes and whatever you want to choose, all the different tone colors and what instruments you want to do. Indie is probably my favorite one of the whole, just because it focuses on the small ensemble, like a string quartet, that kind of thing, and little woodwind ensembles. So just give me a second, I'll play a tiny bit. This is all live. There we go. I found a way to break it. Oh well. Yep. I think what I did is I used my pedal in the middle of changing a phrase and it kept it going. But you get the idea. It's so cool, and it allows you to just write music really, 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 really fast. And I don't really consider these libraries to be like the only thing you should use. Instead, I would rather use it as a bed to write something else on top of. So I might use Indie to create a bed, like that little cello thing, and then I might grab from a different library a solo woodwind and write my own little line, or take a piano, whatever. They're composition tools, and that's how they even describe themselves. They're not meant to be like plagiaristic, copy this entire sample, hold down a note, and you're done. Rather, it's a tool to inspire creativity, and I just think it's phenomenal. Here's another one, Espressivo. This one is in 12/8 time, because a lot of these they have a lot of packs, but this library is recorded only in 12/8. And so what it does is it just means, actually no, I'm getting that confused with Grosso. Espressivo is a bunch of aleatoric phrases, and same kind of deal. You can play chords and you can play around with it, and they're all mapped differently and just so interesting. So for example, let me just doodle with this one. So we have like this string thing. This is for like horror ambient music. Super interesting stuff. So if you're into horror or ambient music, this is an amazing way to create these atmospheric pads in the background. Again, to take maybe a choir sound or something on more melodic, something that's more front and center, to put on top of it. So I've used that a bunch, and I just think it's so cool. They have a lot of packs, and I get them confused about what does what. But yeah, so those are the two. I'm going to feature today, but some other big ones to check out would be Grosso, Noir, and man, really anything they do is phenomenal. Just watch your budget because it can add up really fast if you're not careful. So moving on to synths. I could talk about synths all day, but I want to narrow it down to 3. I feel like these are the 3 that I use the most, I've gotten the most mileage out of, and ultimately are probably the most useful for you at 3 different price points. The first is Spectrasonic's Omnisphere, which has been around forever. You may have heard of Omnisphere. It's probably the most used plugin of all time by composers in film and TV, because people in that situation have to write very, 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 very fast, like 50 minutes of music a week. It's insane, like 5 minutes a day of music. So they have their trusty Omnisphere. It's a synth engine that you don't get to create your own synths. It's more of a sampler because they're all preset patches that you can tweak, but it's just so deep and powerful. Anything by Spectrasonics is top notch. We could end the whole conversation here and call it a day, but Omnisphere is so powerful because it's not just synths, but they have a ton of samples. Like they have choirs in here, they have pipe organ, they have ethnic strings, and it's just crazy how deep this thing goes. So I highly encourage you to look into it. But this is it's a great all-around engine that really supports every genre of music, and I use it in almost everything I write. So here's just one little patch I pulled up. So Epic Music, it's an absolute must, especially when you're talking about their synth basses, any kind of lead lines, any kind of dance music, huge pads, also really soft and gentle pads. But really that's kind of a no-brainer. If you can afford that and add it to your arsenal, I would immediately. Something you know about Spectrasonics is they never, ever go on sale. It's like the Apple mentality. They just don't, and they never will need to, because they're that good, and that they have a very strong reputation in the industry as being one of the best. So don't expect any of their products to go on sale. If you want it, just get it if that's something you're able to afford. It'll serve you very well. Next up is The Dark Zebra by UVI. Now, a quick note, Omnisphere is at $479, and oops, I have these out of order today. My bad. Heaviosity Gravity is the next one. That is $449, so it's just right under Omnisphere. If I had to pick between the two, I would pick Omnisphere just because it's more versatile, but I do think Gravity is a very special engine that deserves a lot of attention. It doesn't get a lot of attention. It's good at one thing, but that thing is epic pads, epic risers, and it's more of a sound design tool, but it's fantastic for any kind of ambient music. A lot of their default pads are fantastic. So here's one of them. This is called Above Beauty. It's just one of the ethereal pads. So these patches are all very tweakable. You can change any of the elements here, but my favorite element is the punish button, which is in all Heaviosity patches, as you'll see later in Damage with the percussion section. And it's just a compression tool that you can crank up all the way to 100 if you want. And that is the amount of crushing. That's the amount of volume maximizing through compression. So just listen to this pad, how dirty it becomes the more I crank it up. So of course, I'm not going to let you hear the full brunt of that. I have a limiter on my YouTube live right now, so you're not going to hear it crackling as bad as I do in my ears. This is something that you do if you really want something to sound gritty and gross and like, I don't know, in your face. That's what it's for. It's supposed to kind of trash up stuff. So it's a great engine. I don't think it's a one size fits all by any means, but it does that very, very well. The next one here is UVI Zebra. Zebra, you can get Zebra 2, or the Dark Zebra, which is an expansion on top of that. Quick note about this. Many of you are familiar with composer Hans Zimmer in the film scoring world. So Urs Heckman is a synth engineer who created Zebra for Hans Zimmer. And he did it to mimic the analog modular synths that Zimmer has. And it's kind of used as a way to mimic the Dark Knight film series. You know, obviously it's not as big as it used to be, but that was a huge staple in the industry as like a monument of a new direction in film scoring. And I'm sure many of you have been very influenced by that sound, as I have, that very ostinato driven synth patches. And this is honestly one of the cleanest patches I've ever used. Takes up the least amount of space. Omnisphere is notorious for taking up a lot of RAM and a lot of CPU, but Zebra almost takes up nothing. It's most known for its high arpeggios and its lead lines and its forlorn type sounds, and everything in here sounds like Hans Zimmer because it was designed using his ideas. So even something as simple as this. So all these patches, you can use the mod wheel to write up and down, but you notice most notably the panel in front of us. This is modeled after an analog synth. So if you ever use an analog synth, you have to patch stuff in order with the cables. And so this is just mimicking that. And at any point you can add another oscillator with 1,000 parameters. You can add another effect beneath that. You can shift stuff around. So it's kind of, it's the easiest way you could ever build your own analog synth. So even what I just did, here's a new sound. Super cool stuff. And it has a phenomenal arpeggiator with notes right here. You can choose the velocities of them. You can choose the notes. And you can just do crazy stuff. Here's a quick tweak I might do. So let's do eighth notes instead. Really cool stuff. So that is an amazing way to build your own synths, but it's just a different way of doing it. I think I still personally prefer to build patches through Massive because it's more of a visual GUI that I understand and can use more quickly. But if you want to experiment and maybe just create sounds that you don't have in your head and you just want to kind of experiment, I think the Zebra is a fantastic tool for that, especially because of how small of a footprint it has. Next up, let's look at brass. This is really where we get into the fun stuff with orchestral music. I get these questions all the time about what's your favorite brass, what's your favorite woodwinds and strings. And what's really interesting is in the last 3 to 4 years, in fact, the last time I did a video like this was 2017. This has not changed. CineSamples, CineBrass, and for woodwinds, CineWinds Core and Pro. CineSamples has really remained at the top 1 or 2 spots. Even though they're slightly dated, they're really not, because you record an orchestra well, it's going to have an evergreen sound. So CineSamples is just phenomenal, and I believe if this link is still up to date, it is. Look, Native Instruments is still doing CineSamples. They have now not migrated, but Native Instruments sells them now. Which is really cool because they have specials as well. They have discounts periodically. But yeah, so CineSamples, what makes their instruments different than the rest on the market is they use the sustain pedal on the keyboard. It might not sound like a big deal, but it really is if you're trying to achieve musicality by playing a sample in, because the pedal has a lot of control over the legato versus staccato. So here's a very basic patch here. This is a 12-horn ensemble with CineBrass. And I'm going to show you with and without the pedal how different you can make this sound and how musical you can make it by using the mod wheel, velocity, this is how hard you play on the keyboard, with my foot, which is the sustain pedal. So here we go. I can play short with the mod wheel up. Now let's do it with mod wheel down. as I crank it up. But more importantly than all that, let's use my foot for sustain. Phenomenal sound. And mind you that none of my patches today are run through any outside effects. There's no reverb, there's no delay, there's no EQ going through any of these. These are all out of the box. So this is just the orchestral hall recording. Phenomenal. Such a good sound. Another patch I love to use is the Monster Low Brass in CineBrass Pro. Use this in my epic stuff all the time. At the end of a big epic. It's low C. I love that. It's just a huge ensemble. It's all the bass trombones with trombones and tubas. It's this huge, massive sound. Another one, I think, another angle that Cinesamples uses, which is the ensemble recording, where they record chords. Very similar to Sonokinetic, but instead of phrases, they're actually controllable from the keyboard. Check this out. This is really, really special. So if I hold down the note with my pedal to make it legato, that's a major chord. But look what happens if I change to each C on the keyboard. It's going to change the inversion. What? And if I can do that for every one. Now they're all major chords right now because of where I'm at in the octave. But check this out. Very unique way. To move between inversions in a very musical way and to still have control, but write quickly. Now this is just the majors. I can actually shift my octaves. If you had a full-size keyboard like the one behind me, I can play major and minor back and forth like this. So just fantastic sampling. They do an incredible job. The next one I want to look at, I guess I should mention that Cinesamples is usually $399 for most of their samples. We'll see the same thing with CineWinds later. But another shout out I have to give here because it's so inexpensive and so amazing. This is the Chapman Trumpet from Embertone. And a fun little aside, even though their sales page doesn't even include it, which is hilarious to me, they do have a bonus patch called the Chapman Tuba. So if you like the Chapman Trumpet, you also get the tuba with it. I think it's the greatest sampling company on the planet. Everything by Embertone is unbelievable, which is why I believe they don't release a lot because they have to do so much work. But just check this out. Like, it sounds exactly like a real trumpet. Ridiculously good. And all of the Embertone instruments, if you've never used Embertone, they're usually super inexpensive, and yet they have some of the highest programming ability out there because they just go the extra mile by not only recording every dynamic, every possible articulation and that kind of stuff, but the way that they script the contact instrument to seamlessly jump between all the different recordings is just mind-blowing to me. The fact that it can jump between fast and long notes. And you control everything with vibrato with the mod wheel. Just so good to me. And we'll come across in a few minutes with the Joshua Bell violin in strings, which has the same programming, which is just ridiculously good. Move on. Let's go to woodwinds. So woodwinds, there are so many woodwinds out there on the market, and this is a category that is changing and has changed over the last several years since the last time I did one of these videos. So originally, CineWinds was what I would consider to be the king, the guys on top. And I feel that that may still be the case. However, I don't think from an ensemble perspective that they necessarily hold up as well as my current favorite, which is Woodwinds Ensembles by Sonokinetic. And remember, Sonokinetic libraries are super on sale right now with native instruments. So use those links and check them out. I think that's going to be really cool. So Sonokinetic, this is one of their few instruments that is not phrase-based. It's actually sample-based. So if I load it open, what makes this so unique and usable, even though it is a high price point of $434, I like that it literally has in one patch every possible articulation from the ensemble. So this is a flute ensemble, everything I could ever need, all controlled by key switching. At any point, I can click on it to change it. And then within the menu of, for example, marcato, non-vibrato, you can then choose which type of non-vibrato. You could even choose 2 different palettes. So the deep sampling here is unreal. Not just one staccato flute ensemble, but a second one. Not to mention all the round robin samples. So that means that they're recording this stuff like 7 times on top of all of these parameters. So the number of samples involved is just mind-boggling. This stuff is ridiculously powerful. So what I like to do, the way that I like to use it, I like to load up all 4 ensembles at once as a multi. I'll load flutes, because that's all this library is. It's 4 patches, the 4 different categories. So you have flutes, oboes, clarinets, and bassoons. So these are all ensembles. These are not solos. Each of these is like a grouping of 4 or so instruments. So it's a small ensemble, as you'd expect from a real orchestra. And I like to just toggle the same key switch for all 4 of them because they're on MIDI channel Omni, which means anything I do on my keyboard, it'll play all of the patches at once as a multi. So if I do vibrato, do the same thing and play around with staccato. Let me find the key switch for that. There it is. Let me try staccatissimo. It's a shorter version of it. Make sure each of them are on that. There's just so many different. I mean, look at these articulations. We're down to like trills, minor and major, and I don't even know what frullato is. And mordants and like chromatic scales and runs and pentatonic scales and what? It's just so deep, so deep. And don't be. A lot of composers see, oh, it only has 4 patches, so it must be a really terrible library. But that's a bad way of thinking. I love libraries that focus on one thing and do it extremely well. And that way, as you build your arsenal over time, you have one tool for the exact occasion that you need. So I have just come to learn that if I want an ensemble woodwinds, this is the route to go because it's so usable. And you can do it in bulk like this across the entire woodwind ensemble and have all these little controls, which I think is so cool. Let's get some bassoon love. Now keep in mind, woodwinds are never going to be like harsh and in your face. Epic music does not use woodwinds, but rather for more like John Williams style and Danny Elfman style writing, you're going to want a lot of woodwinds. So this is a fantastic library for that. So that's if you want ensembles. That's if you want to have a flute ensemble, oboes, clarinets, and bassoons. But for all the other occasions, I'd say that's about half of the time you need ensembles. But if you really want to write music that has an emotional depth to it, then you really have to invest in good solo woodwinds. So the two options we have that are really kind of the industry standards, we have Cinesamples, CineWinds, and then we have 8Dio Claire woodwinds. They kind of overlap. You really can't get by with just one, which is kind of unfortunate that there really is no one library that's come out that tackles all the things. And here's why. So Cinesamples, CineWinds, it has solo flute, oboe, B-flat clarinet, and bassoon. And then if you get the Pro extension, which is another $400, you'll then get alto and bass flute, English horn, and E-flat clarinet, which are more of the British style instruments, which are the extended instruments, which a lot of composers still use. I love using those instruments personally. And that is still not the full gamut, because where's piccolo, right? What's missing? Contrabassoon. I think contrabassoon and bass clarinet are included in Pro. So my point is, you have to kind of get both of these things or all of these things to cover all your bases. But just to check out Claire woodwinds, it has all the main instruments you might want. So it has solo piccolo, flute, alto flute, oboe, English horn, B-flat clarinet, and bassoon. So it has almost all of them. So you kind of have to mix and match to get exactly what you need. So for example, here is CineWinds alto flute, which is absolutely gorgeous. Cool. And then you compare that to Claire woodwinds, just as beautiful. Here's the English horn. Beautiful, beautiful. I use Claire woodwinds as much as I possibly can. Not every soundtrack calls for woodwinds, but anytime I want solo woodwinds, that's usually my go-to, and then I'll supplement it with CineWinds as I need. And then of course for ensemble, look at the Sonokinetic Woodwinds Ensemble. Good stuff. There used to be the Berlin woodwinds and the VSL woodwinds. Those were kind of the kings of the jungle, but over time they just don't hold up like they used to. Really, these guys right here are the pioneers moving forward in the woodwind industry. Cool. Let's move on to strings. And of course, since this is a live stream, if you guys have questions as we go, you guys have made a lot of cool comments and such, but if you have any questions as we're going through, I'd love to help you with that. So strings. Strings are by far the most proliferated in the industry. There are more string libraries out there than any other library, which kind of poses the question, why? I believe, as a string player myself, and I've played in orchestras, and I've obviously written for orchestras, strings are really the bread and butter of an orchestra. If you take strings out, it's a band, right? Strings are the emotional thermometer of a piece of music when it comes to orchestra. Because if strings are playing hard and crazy, then you're probably going to be in an action type sequence. But if they're very slow and legato and beautiful, then it's going to be a much more emotional and intimate type setting. So you got to get your strings right. I would even argue that strings are the most important sample in the entire orchestra, because you could have amazing sounding woodwinds and brass and even percussion and choir, but if your strings suck, your whole thing just falls apart. So you got to get this right. Thankfully, there are a lot of options, and I've narrowed it down to, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I know it sounds like a lot, but when we're talking about, there's dozens of companies out there that do strings. it can get so overwhelming so fast. So let's talk about it real quick. The first one I want to put on there is Spitfire Audio. They are by far the most expensive of the bunch, but probably the highest quality as well. Spitfire has even come up with a guide. This is how much they have. It's ridiculous. They have a full guide here that goes through every single one of their libraries for strings only. These are just strings, guys. It walks through when you might need this one versus this one versus this one versus this one. And if you have no constraints to your budget, I would go that route. But we're talking thousands there versus hundreds. I want to guide you down the hundreds route, and then perhaps if you get to a level where you want the best of the best of the best, then I would look at Spitfire. But ultimately, Spitfire is all about a British sound. It's about achieving kind of a classical sound, if you will, versus a film sound. Now, they did more recently come out with the Hans Zimmer strings, which are much more Western American film type sound, which is the big, heavy, extra low basses and extended range and that kind of stuff. But it's a different sound. So if you're looking for a British, very soft sound, then I would say Spitfire is totally worth it. But I want to compare that to some other items here today. And I do have some Spitfire instruments, and one I do want to show off, which I think it's second to none for very low energy, very beautiful, intimate music. It's the Albion series, specifically Albion 2, L'Aigria. And they have a ton of great patches in here, but notice how it's just one thing. They have a high strings, low strings. They even have some euphoniums and recorders and that kind of stuff to help supplement. Just fantastic stuff. But even right here, here's just a beautiful string patch. It's very subdued. This is without any additional reverb or anything. Just gorgeous stuff. Another patch I love to use in almost every film score I do is the Flautando Strings. I've never found another library that has these, by the way. Especially like this high stuff. Get all the scratches. This is so good. Put some piano underneath, some choir underneath, solo woodwind. Great for background music, just beautiful. They also have really solid consordino patches. Consordino is the mute you put, a little rubber mute you put on top of your strings. Good stuff, really good stuff. And it's worth it. It's expensive, but it's worth it. However, not everyone wants that or needs that. I want to give some alternatives here. Something that I use all the time, even with some Spitfire libraries, what I use, my go-to every time, the only time I don't use this is if I feel like Spitfire would do a better job. And that's 8Dio's Adagietto Strings. I love it so much because it is all the essentials that you need. It is $118, 8Dio. Love 8Dio stuff. It's the most price-sensitive string collection by far. It only has 4 different instrument categories: violin, viola, cello, double bass. But each one is really deeply sampled. You have your legatos, staccato, spiccato, tremolo, pizzicato patches. And you even have, I should say, you do not have your extended techniques. So you're not going to have trills, glissandos, collegno, etc. But that's where you'll go to the other patches for. But if you want the basic, really good sounding legatos, really good tremolos, pizzicatos, and what I miss, legatos, then this is the place to look because it's just a powerhouse. So let me show off 2 patches there that I use almost all the time. First one is a dynamic bowing of a consordino patch. So it means all the instruments have the little mute on, and they're all playing in time to a conductor conducting 2 bars of music. What's cool about this scripting is that it will match your tempo. So what they do in the recording session is they record at probably 5 or 6 different tempos at every single chord, every dynamic. And then once they put it in here, whatever your session says, it's like right now, my Cubase session that you see in front of you is at 120 beats per minute. So this is going to play exactly 2 bars of 120 beats, which is really cool when you're trying to film score and match stuff to markers. So just check this out, it's gorgeous. Just ridiculously good, and that's with no reverb or anything, but I would probably put a touch of reverb on it. Another one from Adagietto. Their low strings are stellar, especially the spiccato patches. Ridiculously good stuff. Love, love, love. Use that all the time in my epic stuff. Not so good for the soft stuff, and that's really where the Spitfire stuff shines. Here's another one, totally out of left field. This is Sonokinetic Ostinato Strings. If you don't have any Sonokinetic products, this is probably the first one I grab. Ostinato. Their Ostinato series is ridiculously powerful. I used to be a naysayer before I used it. Then I became an absolute diehard fan because I write a lot of ostinato music. That's actually a staple of my writing style. If you ever listen to my soundtracks, there's always a little something in the background. It could be a synth line, a string line, a brass line, whatever. It's the way that I write. So an ostinato is just a repeating phrase that repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats. So it's such a natural extension of my writing style that it makes for a beautiful realism as well as a fast way to write music. So just like all of their patches, you have the articulation up top on the right side of the screen, which is all these colors, and then the blue is the part that you can actually play by changing the chord shape. So for example, I have everything set to 16th notes. It's tempo synced to 120 in my session, and you can change all kinds of parameters to change however you want it to be. Let's just play. So I use this for trailers almost every single time. So let's say, for example, I want a C minor chord. I'm going to play a C minor in my left hand. And it's just going to keep repeating. I'm going to keep changing chords as I go. And it'll read every chord up to a 7th chord. Oh, and half diminished, augmented, all the way up to 7th chord. So it'll read up to 4 notes at a time. Which is so cool. And you can play around with the bass inversion if you want it on or off, and the absolute versus relative in the way that it reads, so that whether or not you want it to do root always or first, second, and third position. So right now it's in a first inversion, even though I'm playing because I'm playing a C on the bottom of the chord. But if I want it to always play an A flat, which is the root, that kind of thing. Now, that doesn't sound super realistic because I'm not playing to a tempo, like to a click. I'm just kind of guessing. But more than that, that's not how real orchestras play. Real orchestras change between their rhythms, right? So that's why you use the right hand to change up here, up top. You'll see how the notes are changing. And that way, that kind of thing. So you go back and forth and you play with it. And if you really want to get fancy, you can throw ostinato brass, ostinato woodwinds all into the same multi. And then every time you change, all of the full orchestra will do ostinatos and change with you, which is so cool. And you can drag and drop the MIDI between your different instruments, which is super cool, really interesting. Now, take a drink of water before this next one because it gets me super duper excited. You can read ahead if you want. Alrighty, my favorite of the entire list today. This is Joshua Bell Violin by Impertone, priced at $199. Should be priced at $999. No joke. This thing should be priced 4 times as much. Just go get it right now. Here's why. I'm a violin player, and I sound worse than if I play this instrument. What? That is the mark of the robots taking over the world right there. This is just a ridiculous patch. Anyone who's used it, and I already heard some people in the chat talking about it, if you've used it, you know. It is unparalleled. Impertone is probably the greatest contact programmer on the planet. Every time I use their instruments, it's just musical, it's interesting, and it's just beautiful. So let me give you a quick little demo. This is all live right in front of you. You can tell I like it, right? So what makes this so interesting is, yes, like any normal instrument, you can click on the articulations button and change it to something else that you want to use. Or spiccato. I love that it also includes some of these rare things like ricochet. Of course, pizzicato. Harmonics. But really what makes this special, and look, you can even add the mute on top if you want. That would be Sordino. And then Sol Ponticello is when you play over the bridge. And then Sol Tasto is when you play like the flautando strings we did earlier. Super cool stuff. So yeah, it's just ridiculous. But my favorite part of this whole thing is that as I play, let me turn that stuff off. Just turn a bunch of stuff on. There we go. As I play, it dynamically changes between each of the articulations. It knows how hard I play. It knows how fast I play. And it just changes everything in real time, which blows my mind. And that's with no reverb, by the way. That's just the default orchestral hall recording that they did with the actual Joshua Bell and his Stradivarius violin. So I can't speak highly enough about it. So much so that Impertone actually asked me to write a demo track that became the lead track, the first track when you go to their sales page. That's my track, which is super cool. And then even Joshua Bell himself reached out and said he really likes the track that I wrote, which is just amazing. So I love Impertone. I love working with them, and yeah, just go support them. So of course, the next one I have to talk about is another Impertone bundle. This one is called the Intimate Solo Strings Bundle, a bit more. It's at $297. I'll be honest, I'm not going to rave about these the same way because these came about 3 years before Joshua Bell, and I think they were still working out the kinks of how to program strings. So these just, they kind of pale in comparison, but they're still good. So I would not get this for the violin, which is, it's called the Friedlander violin. I'll get the Joshua Bell for sure, but they also have the Fischer viola, the Blakes cello, and the Leonid bass. So I think those three are still pretty solid. So for example, here's the Fisher viola. But you can hear a noticeable quality difference between that and the Joshua Bell. It's just the scripting, it's the way they recorded and that kind of stuff. So unfortunately, we're going to have to wait until Embertone blesses us with a viola, cello, and bass sampled in the same high quality way that they did with Joshua Bell. But until then, these will have to do, and it'll get us by. So that's all I'll say about that. Let's move on, because I know that everyone has their opinions about strings. But I think that's a nice amount that will get us through. It'll serve all the purposes, both the ensembles and the solo instruments. So let's move on. Let's go to percussion. I only want to talk about 2 patches because just like the other instruments, other instrument groups, there's a sea of percussion out there. But I don't think that's something you need to spend a lot of money on. But I do think there are 2 categories you need to hit. You need an amazing library that gets you all of the orchestral percussion, all the things like the bass drums, the cymbal swells, the gongs, the snare drums, and all of those type things. And the other side, we gotta have electronic hybrid percussion, things that are meant for sound design, things that are meant for big epic trailer moments, and kind of the bigger than life moments. You gotta have both. I remember early in my career, I tried writing epic music with orchestral patches. And it was okay. It just never had the oomph. It never had the sound design angle. And I distinctly remember the first time I ever recorded with a live orchestra, I wrote a bunch of bass drum parts, a lot of timpani parts. And after I heard the recording back, I thought, oh man, that was cool, but that percussion was so weak. Why was it so weak? And then I realized that I had gotten caught into the mindset of samples, because in my mixes on my DAW, I had just boosted the volume or added 17 bass drums or whatever. But in real life, you only get 1 bass drum. You get 1 timpani set. So it's not like it's going to be this bigger than life thing. So you need to make sure that what you're writing for is actually the intention in your DAW. So if you're going to write for orchestral percussion, use an orchestral percussion library. And if you're going to write for sound design, use a sound design library. They can mix, sort of, but I would try to steer one towards the other. So you don't necessarily need both of these, but if you are going to try to do both in your world, maybe you write for film and games, maybe you write for trailers and podcasts, whatever, then you're going to want to have both. So the 2 we're talking about today are Red Room Audio Saga Acoustic Trailer Percussion. And the second is Damage by Heaviosity. So quick note about Red Room Audio, the acoustic, it's called Saga Acoustic Trailer Percussion. I've done a review of that one as well, so click on that link if you want to see the full review. It'll go through every single instrument. But right now, I'm just taking orchestral ensembles mixed with world ensembles mixed with metal sheets. This library has everything you need for orchestral, because it has all those things I mentioned, from gongs and cymbals to orchestral snares and bass drums and all that kind of stuff. You put it all together and you get this really cool sound. So it's an amazing sound. Question in the audience from Gnome Magician, who says, what about the Symphonic series by Native? I talk about the percussion series there. Native instruments, well, remember, if you have Komplete, then you're going to be covered. You're going to have a pretty basic, Komplete covers a basic territory in each of these categories today. That's why I call them all-in-ones. But it's not going to give you a super high quality depth that some of these others would do. The other one is Heaviosity Damage, which has been in the industry for a very long time, and it's just mangled up huge, bigger than life type sounds like this. Lots of glass breaking sound design. And just like we mentioned before, it has the Heaviosity Punish button, so you can compress the snot out of this. Just kind of mess with it till it's audible in your mix. If you want the garbagey sound. But yeah. So a quick note about Saga, just like the other palette, that is one of my affiliate partners. So if you want to support my channel and if you want to get 20% off Saga, highly recommend it. You can use the promo code RRAMalin20, 20% off. Go check that out with the link in the description below or from the article. I think that'll serve you very well. And the biggest benefit here is it gets us away from things like the Composer Cloud by East West, or even if you want to buy the Symphonic Orchestra. You're spending hundreds of dollars on a 15-year-old product that has not been updated and is not, I don't want to go on a huge rant here, but this is kind of a theme for today. Whenever we can use Kontakt instruments, we should, because we can purge samples, we can lower the footprint. But if we use things like the Play engine by East West, Quantum Leap, man, it just takes up so much space, and it sucks up a lot of the energy from your session, and it'll just make your stuff crash a lot. And I've never had a good experience with it. And so anytime I can steer you away and really walk towards the future, which is Kontakt and has been for a long time, I think it's going to be very, very beneficial for you. So going on back, let's move forward. So let's get out of percussion. Let's go to choirs. This is a really fun one to talk about as well. We're a little over halfway here, so keep sticking around with the stream if you want to learn more about the rest. I want to wrap this thing up soon. So here we are. We are with choirs. Now, there's a ton of choirs on the market as well. They're almost as proliferated as strings. They're just everywhere. But the ones I want to focus on are my favorites, the ones that I think have the biggest bang for your buck and the most features that really sound the best. So 8Dio is at the top of the list of $598, the Insolidus Choir, but we're going to compare that with the free Spitfire Labs Eric Whitacre Choir and some things in between. I think there's something here for everybody. Choirs are very hard to do right because you got to focus on both vocals, obviously the ahs, the ohs, the vowels that are quintessential in all epic music and big fantasy style music, orchestral music. We also have to focus on lyrics and finding a way to musically get actual words, whether they're Latin syllables or singable phrases and English, right? We got to find ways to marry these two worlds together. So that's why there's so many different solutions out there. And a fun comment, someone mentioned that East-West Play, that engine, they used to have this orchestral choir, this symphonic choir. It was the very first one. It had a word builder. You could actually type in words and it would sing it back, but it sounded so bad. It sounded so fake, and no one believes that. It doesn't feel good. It makes more sense to have pre-recorded words that you can mash together. But anyway, if you want to learn more about the Insolidus Choir, right here I have a review video where I scored a movie trailer with it, and you can check out a very in-depth review of how to use all the different functions in there. But a quick little overview here. It just kind of has everything you need in a choir, including different time signatures like 3/4 and 4/4 phrases. They're all Latin phrases, but you can also have the kind of the ahs, the ohs, the es, the ahs, all that kind of stuff. And you can also mix and match the levels of the men versus women, which is really good. You have short phrases, long phrases. So some of my favorites to use here are the pre-recorded phrases that hang on every syllable. So what that means is you can change with your fingers if you're holding something. It's going to hold the last note. Basically what it does is it programs all of the notes that I play to end at the same time and to start at the same time. So that's one style of writing. That's useful for some people, but another way here, I do want to pull this up. I think it'll be worthwhile. Just take a second to do it. So within choir, let's get another time-stretched patch, but this time let's just do a 2-syllable patch. And they also have really cool atonal yells, which I think are really special. Really cool for trailers to go, ah, that kind of thing. But something like this. This is just so cool to put over an orchestra. Oh yeah, I'm out of range. So it's just really interesting. You have to kind of play with it a little bit. And of course, you can always just use the default ahs and ohs if you don't want to fiddle around with all the syllables. But this is a beautiful sound, gorgeous, huge choir type sound. Another one that I want to talk about here is Sonokinetic's Tutti Vox, probably one of the most interesting choir libraries on the market because it focuses on atonal choir, which is kind of the opposite of what you think with a choir library, but it focuses on shapes. So at any point I can choose a shape or a loop and 4-bar, 2-bar, glissandi, clusters, and just go to town with the shapes I want. And then I can play it on my keyboard like that. And then get really weird with like vocal effects. Super cool stuff. I think is really interesting. I'll play a second of this, but here is a track that I wrote called Fleshmonger in the Dark Souls style using this choir. I think it's worth taking a second to listen. Oh, never mind. I guess if you want to listen to that, you have to go to the page. I don't think I can do it during a stream. I think YouTube yells at me. It won't play a Facebook video. But anyway, check that out when you get a second, because I think it's really interesting because it uses a lot of the kind of choir sound on top of like these like screaming strings. Super interesting stuff. But anyway, quick question from Gnome Magician: Aftertouch or expression? So I think they're referring to the Insolidus Choir. Yeah, so you have full control over the aftertouch and the expression. You can use your own wheels, including the mod wheel, to completely control that stuff. It's very, very deep. Moving on, we have Sound Iron, which is an ancient prehistoric company. They've been bought out since by Adagietto, and some of their properties have split. But Requiem Light, it's very, very old, very dated, but still one of the best budget libraries still around because they still have very solid short versus long choirs. You can also build your own phrases. So for example, something like this. Now I should probably next time choose better words, but you have a full gamut here of different syllables. So like do, fa, sanctus, maybe? Here we go. It's just interesting stuff that you can throw on top of an epic trailer type track, and it's just super helpful. Another one, as I kind of speed through these to be on time, Adagietto Barbary solo vocals. So there's a lot of great solo vocals out there as well, which are beautiful for any type of slow track. So here's like a little chant by Barbary. This is beautiful for like video games and fantasy type stuff, to just throw this, probably put a lot of reverb on it and just go to town. So for example, I do want to just show what that would be like. If I go down to the effects within, let's see if I can just toss on a little reverb. And this is within contact. I don't use that too much. Here, let's take a quick detour, shall we? Detour time. I'm just gonna throw some reverb on that track to see how ethereal that could get us in a live situation. So here's a hall. And this particular phrase library has so many. That particular song doesn't have a ton of like high notes, but she's a soprano, so there's a lot of different phrases in there, so you can play around. But the point is, you can use solo libraries like that to really help soar on top of an orchestra. Gorgeous stuff. You hear that all over the place, especially in video game soundtracks. Next up, and last for the choirs, is a free one called Eric Whitacre Choir by Spitfire Labs. It only does one thing. It does a bunch of oohs. But I think those who have used it would agree that this is gorgeous. Very usable in a lot of context. So I hope that this is something that's very useful for you guys. Moving on, as we get close to the end here, ethnic and world instruments. So here we have a lot of options, but there's one instrument library that I have fallen in love with, and it is the UVI World Suite. This thing has so many instruments baked in. It's pretty insane. 50,000 samples, 8,000 loops and phrases, over 320 different instruments to choose from. And they're organized by territory of the world. So we have Africa, Asia, Australia, Celtic, Eastern Europe, India, Indonesia, Middle East, Occidental, which is Asia type area, South America, Spanish Gypsy, and West Indies. So there's so much in here. It's crazy. I don't have time at all. It'd take an hour or two to even talk through all of it. But guitars, flutes, drums, percussion, it's just wild. And it's all ethnically accurate to those countries. And I think it's absolutely phenomenal. It's what UVI is most known for. And here in the blog, I have an entire short film that I scored using instruments from UVI. I think it's incredible. So I want to go through a few of these that just kind of showcase different sounds you might find within it. First would be a pan flute. Oops, there we go. Let me get rid of that bar so you guys can see. The pan pipes, for example. So that's something you would never find in an orchestral library. And I would say the same of all of these instruments that are in here. It really helps to round out your palette. Here's an accordion. Sounds really, really, really good. Even have, a tambora, for example, super Eastern instrument. So just really cool stuff here, and literally hundreds of instruments baked in here. Well worth looking into, because you're just not going to find that in Komplete or any of these packs I've talked about today. It's a fantastic, just amazing purchase there. Next up, I want to take a look at two of my favorite ethnic instruments, also by Embertone. So they're incredibly well programmed, One is $20. That's the Shire Whistle. The other is free, the Ivory Wind. Go get it right now. This Shire Whistle is modeled after Lord of the Rings and Braveheart. Let's see if I can get it. Oops, I pushed the wrong buttons. So what makes this really special, just like every Embertone instrument, is the programming of the velocity and the portamento between notes. So you'll notice when I push something hard, it does an ornament, and you can change it to minor. I just love that. And you can choose between different vibrato styles. That's the Braveheart vibrato because it's very fast. And then of course the portamento is when I play the second note soft after holding a note, like this. Super, super useful. I'll use that all the time. $20, that's a steal. And the next one I want to showcase is the Ivory Wind, which is free. Very similar. This is a Renaissance flute. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Go grab that. It's for free. Okay, next up, I want to talk about chiptune music. Now, this is not a plugin, but if you want to write chiptune music, go check out DefleMask. It's my favorite tracker. Very useful for writing in Sega Genesis style and writing in NES, Game Boy, Commodore 64, ton of stuff in there. So that's probably the most authentic way to do it. But if you want to have MIDI control, aka writing in a DAW, where you can move stuff around and see it visually, then you're going to have to deal with VSTs. Now, really there's three on the market that help cover all of your bases. The first one is Chipsounds by Plogue, $95. Chipsounds really specializes in arcade machines and some of the early consoles. So NES, Game Boy, Atari, Commodore 64 with the SID chip, the SID. And just so I want to show that real quick. This is a SID chip, the 6581 chip. And you can find that right here, pure chip. You can find the SID chip and then go from there if you actually know what the chip model numbers are and stuff. If you're into that kind of stuff, the TIA chip would be for the Atari 2600 right there. And they're all very archaic type sounds, but they're all authentic recordings. So you can write 8-bit music. This is the gold mine. Really good stuff there, and lots of presets with bass, drums, leads, whatever. That kind of thing. So you're not going to get a ton of mileage out of that other than 8-bit music, but if you want something else that really takes it further, Super Audio Cart is a fantastic option because it also covers Super Nintendo, but it doesn't really do anything else that's new. Sega Genesis, it does have a lot of FM instruments, but ultimately, quick history on Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis is that most composers of that day and time, of that 16-bit era, they made their own patches from scratch anyway. So having a patch like this, it helps you get closer, but it doesn't necessarily make it your own. And so that's my only critique, but it's a very quick way to get access to these sounds that you can use and have a good time with. So here's a quick little Sega Genesis patch. It's a little guitar. Sounds very sonic. And here is a little example of a Super Nintendo type track that I wrote using these sounds for a review. And then last but not least is Koji. I've talked so much about this on my channel because it's very interesting, because these are old Casio keyboard and Yamaha keyboard compressed samples. So this just kind of fills in the gap of anything Super Nintendo. It just instantly sounds like Super Nintendo, because it is. These are these same types of samples that composers like Koji Kondo used in Super Mario World, as Nobuo Uematsu would have used in the Final Fantasy games, everything in between, the Legend of Zelda series. I'm pretty sure that's literally the star from Mario Paint. That kind of thing. I mean, this stuff is everywhere. It's an amazing way to sound like it immediately with such limited control. Like, it really sounds like it, which I think is so cool. And if you want to grab that, it's already super inexpensive, $45 from Ugertone. But you can grab 50% off using promo code StephenMalin2018. So please take advantage of that. And here's a full review where I talked to the founder, and you can learn more about how that was created. And it's a ton of fun. That has been probably my most watched video over the last few years, and people love that. So I hope you'll add that to your arsenal if you want to write more chiptune music in Super Nintendo style. And the last two categories here, we're gonna breeze through here. We have harp and piano. Harp is not something people talk a lot about, because usually if you have an orchestral library such as Palette, as we talked about at the beginning, or if you have Komplete, or even if you have something like Palette from Red Room Audio, a lot of these things already have harp included, so you don't need to go out and buy a harp. But if you don't already have a harp that you really love and has the control you need, consider these two. We have two options here. We have Arpeggio by Sonokinetic. It really has every articulation you could ever want for a solo orchestral harp. You have short sustains, tremolos, glissandos, effects, and really everything in between. Here's what it looks like. You just click on the articulation you want and you play. Even has some interesting stuff that I've never heard of. I love how it's even out of tune in the best of ways. Really beautiful stuff. And of course, glissandi all over the place with the full scale in front of you. Like every scale. Diminished, augmented. All kinds of stuff here. It's pretty wild how deep this is. So you can truly make whatever you want out of this. Quick question from Fabri in the chat asks about Impact Soundworks Rhapsody Orchestral Percussion. I feel like it doesn't hold up to the ones I've mentioned already today. And then the other side of the harp world is if you want, maybe you didn't know you wanted this, but a harp ensemble. For example, soundtracks like Abzu by Austin Winery take full advantage of a harp ensemble, multiple harps playing at the same time. That I would check out the New Age, or the New Acoustic Grand Ensembles 2 by 8 Dio. Looks like this. And it also has a bunch of other things in there, such as a cimbalum, however you say that, a cimbalum ensemble, marimba ensemble, and wind chimes. And not only does it have great samples like this, thing, but it also can be morphed into any type of synth pad. Which is so crazy. So if I go to another patch, that if you just take that sound and morph it into one of these different pads that they have. Really interesting stuff. So I think that's a great sound design tool. and you can do that to create alien sounds and synth type sounds. So the last category here, which is well worth talking about, are pianos. Now pianos, there's a lot of them out there, but my personal favorite is to focus on something that sounds good in an intimate context and things that sound good in orchestral context. So my top pick every time is going to be Keyscape by Spectrasonics, same company that gave us Omnisphere. So Keyscape, it's pretty expensive. It's $399, and that price doesn't drop. But it's really the industry standard for keyboards, because it not only has my favorite piano in the world, which is the Yamaha C7 grand piano recorded in a studio, but it also has Rhodes electric pianos, Wurlitzers, Planets, clavichords, and many more. It has a ton of retro sounds as well. So it's just very deep and a lot of good stuff, and the presets are phenomenal. There's 2 presets I use in almost every single score. First one is the cinematic piano, and I think you'll hear the difference immediately. Very warm, intimate, in your face, but just beautiful. Very close mic, absolutely gorgeous. Another one I use all the time is the dark score preset. Look at all these C7 presets. These are just different parameters if you tweak around with all these different things. And then of course the Rhodes and the clavinets and all of these other ones, which is just insane. Has an amazing search menu down here, just like Omnisphere. But the dark score is beautiful for like dark brooding stuff. In fact, I was just playing Ori and the Blind, what is it called? Ori and the Will of the Wisps, which is the second game in the series. And composer Gareth Coker totally uses this patch all over the whole thing. These low orchestras going, yeah, yeah. It's such a usable patch in so many different contexts. It's fantastic. Now let's compare that to Native Instruments Noir, which is another hugely used and popular piano right now, which is also a Yamaha C7, much less price point of $149, and it has a particle engine as well. So let's listen to the basic sound first. It's just a pure sound. I think that this is a much better jazz and blues piano. I feel like the Keyscape piano is much more cinematic and dark. But what's really cool about Noir is it has this particles engine that you could turn on and play around with all the different settings to get these little background sounds, which help fill in the gaps, make it more like a synth pad. So if you'd like to check out my full review of that library, go watch that video. You can check out the whole particles engine and how it works and all that good stuff. Quick question from Fabri in the chat. He says, any tip for Super Nintendo sample styles, plugins, or library? Yes, go back up to Super Audio Cart or Koji up at the chiptune section, and you'll find those, and I think you'll be very happy with both. They'll both serve your purposes. And then last but not least, for pianos, we have the Spitfire Labs Soft Piano. It's for free. This thing is gorgeous. The only exception is you have to crank up the volume because it's so soft. It's beautiful, but really only audible in 1 octave range. But gorgeous for film scores and anything really soft and beautiful. So the last item I want to talk about here, it's not an instrument at all, but it's actually mixing plugins. Now you can certainly go to this YouTube video here where I talk about how to mix a MIDI orchestra to sound real using plugins. But these are the plugins I use all the time, kind of my go-to plugins. Again, not sample instruments, but some companies I would highly encourage you to check out are FabFilter, most known for their Pro Q EQ, Waves, which really is the gold standard for EQ, reverb, compression, and anything that's kind of a traditionally a rock sound, but it also works really well in the orchestral world. 2C Audio is really great for their Aether plugin, which is a reverb. And then Isotope is really solid for any kind of mixing and mastering. So their Ozone 8 Advanced plugin is phenomenal. It's a whole suite of plugins that it's one plugin you put up, and then once you open it up, it'll pretty much instantly make your mix sound better, and you can really learn how to tweak the parameters to sound best for you. And the final one would be Sound Toys, which has a lot of experimental sound design type elements. Now, I do think if you don't have any of those, probably the best place to start is Waves, because they're the most affordable, and you'll get the best bang for your buck. I would highly encourage the Waves Gold Bundle or the Silver Bundle, just because for a couple $100 you're going to get 16 to 30 really solid plugins that are really going to help you with your limiting, with your EQs and your compression, that kind of stuff. It's going to help you at least have a very solid base, and then you can dive into some of the more expensive guys there. So guys, that is all the time we have for today, but thank you so much for being a part of the stream, those who got to be part of live. And of course, those of you who are watching this on the replay, thanks for watching this all the way through. I want to encourage you guys, if you have not checked out the blog article yet, go watch through that and read through that, because all the links, you can check them out in the description below, or of course on that page as well, whichever serves you best. And I'd love to hear in the comments, are there any sample libraries that you feel like I missed? I'd love to hear about them, because I'm always trying to keep this thing as up to date as possible. And make sure if perhaps you skipped to the end, you didn't go through all of it, make sure you go to the section that serves you best, and make sure that if there's any discounts, I always update these things throughout the year to make sure that it's as beneficial as possible. So maybe you're not ready to buy today, but if there are some things later down in the year that you are interested in, I hope this becomes a really valuable resource to you that I'm always updating. So thank you guys so much for being a part of this today, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a good one.